first of all, there is no someone who one day woke up and say, oh, we can establish international law. Of course, international law is a product of circumstances, is something, and I'm sure I put the example of the Hague Tribunal for conflict, and when this organism was created, I'm sure that nobody, first Russia and then the United States, nobody were really thinking that they were establishing international law, something of it like that. I insisted on the fact that the Russia and the United States were at the origin of the creation of this tribunal because they were contesting the international order. So that was a kind of way of having more influence on international relations in a moment in which their role, Russian and American role, were not recognized internationally. I mean, it was recognized in the fact, in the sense that Russia was a military power and the United States was already the first economic power in the world. So it was recognized in the fact, but it was not recognized in the legal system, in the institutions. There were no institution that recognized the power of the United States out of the, of course, out of the American continent, where they already had established some relations in which they were, of course, the dominant power. But the origin of international law is essentially in the globalization and movement of globalization. Everybody knows that the first wave of globalization conventionally situated between 1870 and 1930. And it was a powerful wave of globalization, so powerful that it coexisted with a moment of intense protectionism from many states. So it's almost paradoxical, but the volume of international exchanges increased dramatically during these 43 years. And not only that, because in this frame time, we also had a dramatic increase of foreign investment. So not only trade, but also investment increased dramatically. Which means, in very short terms, means that different countries were linked much more. They had relations much more intense at the time, and they, for this very reason, they needed to find common rules. Of course, when you sell anything, you are following some rules. Because the seller and the buyer need to be on the same page, have to respond to the same laws. If you project this movement of selling and buying to international scale, you need international rules, international laws. So the international law is a product of this movement, essentially. This increase of exchange of goods, exchange of capital, investment abroad, movement of population, and so on and so forth. So that was not an intention. Coming back to the first question of Mitch, the United States didn't think that the international law was the way to dominate the world. That went, let's say, automatically, in the sense that it was a consequence, not a plan, a project. And of course, you are right when you say that by not only international law, but by international organisms, international institutions. The United States was able to expand its influence in the entire world. This is perfectly true. But that was not the initial intention. And that was possible because the United States was the most powerful country in the world, especially after World War II. Because this expansion of international institutions dates from the end of World War II, when the superiority of the United States was overwhelming, without any possible comparison with any other period of the history. So they decided, the Americans decided to create international institutions, international organisms. And in that moment, that was, the purpose was precisely to, not only to expand their influence, but also to perpetuate the results of World War II. At the end of World War II, as I said, the United States was an overwhelming dominating power in economic terms, in military terms, in political terms, even in cultural terms, in all the fields, I would say. But it is, I mean, I don't know if someone thought of it, but it's normal that when you reach the peak of your power, then you start going down. After the apogee, there is the decline. So you need to prepare the future. How is possible to perpetuate the result of World War II in the incoming decades? It was possible if through some institutions that had precisely this task. And all these institutions, you mentioned the IFM, but all these IMF, sorry, all these institutions are directed by the United States, sometimes not officially. For example, the World Bank, if I am not wrong, doesn't have any American director. It's by statute. I think it's the World Bank. NATO is the same thing. But I mean, if you think that NATO is not controlled by the United States because the General Secretary is not American, you live in another world, of course. So this is the example of what you said. The stronger is a country, the more this country is able to not only to preserve its sovereignty, but also to dominate the world, which is normal. I am not sure that it's so mechanic, the correlation between the vote in the Security Council leaning toward the United States and the credit from the IMF. I'm not sure. But in any case, it's clear that any of these institutions is a tool to expand the power and to protect and to perpetuate the power of the United States. Problem is that today it's no longer, the situation is no longer, of course, it's no longer a situation of the 1945. And the United States has started to see some of these institutions that it created as a potential threat for their superiority. Sorry. Because very simply because the world became a multipolar, and so there are other countries, other powers that have the capacity today of exploiting these institutions to for the same purposes that was created by the United States at the end of World War II.